In a world of AI data center tomfoolery driving up the price of DDR5 RAM nearly 400%, and graphics cards skyrocketing due to the manufacturing focus shift from gaming to AI, how are you, the average gamer, supposed to play great games from the FromSoftware franchise such as Dark Souls, Sekiro, and Elden Ring under these conditions? I'm on a quest to prove that you can have a fantastic gaming experience while keeping under the price point of a single module of DDR5. Scanning through eBay, I was able to get my hands on a Dell Precision 3420 for $47.70. Let's check under the hood of this beast. We have an i3-6100 Skylake processor from 2015. This is a dual-core processor with 4 threads, running at 3.7 GHz, which will be enough horsepower for our application. In my case, the PC I have is a workstation platform, so it came with a 180-watt power supply and an AMD FirePro W4100. The AMD FirePro graphics card that came with the computer does not keep up with the rest of the hardware, so we swapped it out for the Nvidia Quadro P1000. This will give us double the VRAM capacity, DirectX 12 support, and generally about 200% more raw performance compared to the AMD FirePro 4100. I was able to get the Nvidia Quadro P1000 off eBay for $53. That in combination with the Precision 3420 at $47.70 brings us to a grand total of $100.70. This computer also came with a 256GB Samsung Evo SSD, and this is all packaged in a small form factor case. It also came with 8GB of DDR4 RAM, and the motherboard can support a maximum of 64GB. While the price of DDR5 RAM has been severely impacted by the supply constraints caused by AI data centers, DDR2, DDR3, and DDR4 RAM have largely been isolated from this problem. While the remastered version of Dark Souls is the latest released Souls game in the series, it is very well optimized and forgiving for older hardware. Dark Souls 1 doesn't have many graphical options, but the options we do have available are cranked up all the way and our resolution set to 1080p. With this setup, we have no problem staying at 60 frames per second the entire time. As always, this game looks beautiful. We're utilizing a little more than half the CPU and GPU's capacity, and only with a little over 5 gigs of RAM. Good call on the 6 GB RAM as the minimum system requirement. For this video, I was also blessed with the Black Knight's Ultra Greatsword to help me plow through this game. I was able to dumpster the Bell Gargoyles and 3 light attacks from this John. The Capper Demon also fell to just 3 light attacks. Incredible stuff dropping from the Black Knights, brother. I put this PC to the ultimate stress test, Blighttown. This area is notorious for obliterating the poor PS3's hardware, rendering a dozen frames per second back in 2011. That being said, this animal did not pass 70% of usage in any components. I rang both bells and was feeling on top of the world. The one thing I'd warn against with bad computers in this game is that the game's physics works off frame rate. Originally with the AMD FirePro W4100 that came with this computer was only pulling 30 frames per second, and the game was running at half the speed it was supposed to. Super strange. Wow. Dark Souls Remastered ran great with no surprises. As we go along in the Souls series, surely this trend will continue, right? Right. What if I told you things got a little crazy with Dark Souls 2? Not only was Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin released back in the turn of the century, it is also incredibly optimized for older hardware. Since this is the third and last Souls game released for the beloved PS3, it was beautifully optimized to pull 720 pixels per square inch from your third son of Sony and throw them right onto your LED TV. Let me tell you, this game's humble too. They recommend only having the i3-2100, which is even a weaker processor than the i5-2400 that Dark Souls Remastered recommends. But it pulls high fidelity graphics with lower CPU usage. We have the graphics cranked all the way to Ultra, and this game is absolutely stunning. For the first time ever, I made a woman character in Dark Souls. And let me tell you, Peggy is looking like a smokehouse on this PC. We're giving the Emerald Herald a run for her money. The water detail in particular looks good from this era of gaming. I don't think Souls games ever went very hyper-realistic with the graphics, and I think it really shows with Dark Souls 2. Even though we're more than a decade ahead of the release of this game, in my humble opinion, the graphics still hold their own. Dark Souls 2 also has great hardware stability. You'll notice there really aren't any spikes in usage. Dark Souls 2 is constantly just sipping 60% of the GPU usage, 35% of the CPU usage, and maybe a little over 5 GB of RAM. The game file itself is just so small compared to the others as well. The base game and all the DLC only takes up 18 gigabytes of space. The very open areas with lots of details and textures are also no problem at all. This is a remarkable difference compared to the other games we'll be covering shortly. Just to set the tone, this is one of the older games that we'll be reviewing in this video. For Dark Souls 3, I knew that this was going to be the computer's first real stress test. If you notice, these minimum system requirements are suspiciously lower than Dark Souls Remastered's requirements. And you're right to be suspicious. Yes, the GTX 750 Ti is nearly 2 times faster than the GTX 460 Dark Souls Remastered was recommending. Dark Souls 3, we had the settings set to all low and 1080p resolution. The i3-6100 was able to keep up no problem, but there was no way that this game would have ran on 4 gigabytes of RAM. I was constantly above 5 gigabytes of usage, many times dipping into the 6 gigabyte range. I have to say, this game was generally well optimized as well, considering my main bottleneck was still the GPU. I feel good knowing that I could do a simple GPU upgrade for a rig like this in order to increase my frame rate performance. In smaller areas and boss arenas, I was able to stick to 60 FPS pretty well. The frame rate struggled a bit when loading in larger areas with lots of entities, like the initial starting area, as well as complex boss fights like the Crystal Sage. This is also the first time I've ever used the Greatsword in Dark Souls 3. I really wish the light attack wasn't the overhead slam, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Luckily, Dark Souls 3 does not have the same frame rate physics that Dark Souls Remastered has, so dropping below 60 FPS is no problem. I find it interesting that the PS4 capped this game at 30 FPS, whereas a machine like this can pull 60. I took my gameplay all the way to the Abyss Watchers, which I felt gave me a good feel for how this game was going to run on this PC. Surely the next game will go just as smooth as this one. Guys, what is this? First off, you've milked the second gen Intel processors quite enough. Every single game, including Sekiro, has been recommending those second gen Intel processors this entire time. That's not even the biggest atrocity. I couldn't even test the CPU bottleneck because of the RAM situation. The good guys over at FromSoftware was thinking that you'll be able to cut it with a measly 4 gigabytes of RAM. Safe to say this isn't the case. Majority of the time, I wasn't even able to flex my Nvidia Quattro P1000. I was limited by the 8 gigabytes of RAM this PC has. We had the resolution set to 1080p, but once again, all the settings turned down to low. The majority of the time, I was able to stay at 30 FPS. There were quite a few times I was able to get into the 40s, but I don't recall the frame rate ever dropping below 30 FPS. Once again, this was a title release for the PS4 and was locked to 30 FPS. I would say the PC experience was very similar to the PS4 experience. Sekiro is personally not one of my favorite FromSoftware games, so I didn't play too much into the game on this build. I beat the game before, so I don't want to hear any comment down there about me being bad at this game. I am good at this game, and I will show you the video of me being Ishin. I wanted to get a quick flavor of Sekiro and wrap it up at General Tenzin. Overall, I felt there was more to be desired, but we were very much bottlenecked by the RAM. I really wonder how much the i3-6100 and P1000 GPU could stretch their legs if this system had 16 gigabytes of RAM. Elden Ring enters the fold with some big boy pants on. This is a serious game, not the baby games you've been playing. You could toss that second gen i3 in the bin because it ain't gonna cut it. We need an 8th generation i5 in order to have a playable experience. Also, take that RAM that you had in your Sekiro PC and order 2 more packs, bub, because we're going to need 12 gigabytes of data center bars in this guy. They recommended a GTX 1063GB, which I feel is a good call. The Nvidia Quattro P1000 is slightly behind that GPU, so we'll see how it does. The resolution set to 1080p once again, and all the settings turned all the way down. For some reason, the RAM usage in Elden Ring is remarkably lower than Sekiro. This allows for the GPU to really stretch its legs. You'd figure a game with higher graphics, bigger open world, and a later release would use more RAM than Sekiro does, but it doesn't. We're able to secure 30 FPS in many zones, especially in your normal dungeons and boss fights. In open areas with lots of entities to load and textures to render, the frame rate did drop into the 20s. When I was fighting the Knights Cavalry, it was loading the world textures, as well as the little drizzle that we were having in the lands between. A high pressure system was moving overhead at the cost of my frame rate. The GPU was maxed out in almost all scenarios, with the CPU not far behind it. I feel as though Radon is a good boss to benchmark the performance of this machine. His boss arena is large, He has high graphical attacks and spells, and he's also one of the more difficult bosses early on in this game. If I was having an issue with the frame rate, I think it would show itself problematic for this boss. Overall, Elden Ring did a fantastic job sapping all the resources my computer had to offer. Other than a few hundred megabytes of RAM, the big ring fully used up my GPU and CPU resources. Once again, the PS4 has an extremely similar performance, capping at 30 FPS, sometimes dipping into the 20s with similar graphics. Well, now that I've run out of FromSoftware games, you guys are in for a real treat. You get to see my barren and strange Steam library to see what other games I have to test. With the Witcher 3 expansion, Songs of the Past right around the corner, there's no better time to make sure that you're prepared than now. Let's see how the $100 computer can handle such a demanding game such as The Witcher 3. I'll admit, I've not played The Witcher 3 that much, and I don't want to spoil myself yet. The Witcher 3 is another case of all components being at full usage, no bottlenecks here. We have low settings at 1080p, and we're hovering around the 30 FPS mark majority of the time. I'd say the frame rate is not quite ideal, but definitely playable with this configuration. The minimum requirements on Steam's page are asking for an i5-2500K, 6GB of RAM, and a GTX 660. This rig is similar, if not slightly more powerful than what they're looking for. Once again, we're pulling similar numbers to what the PS4 would pull for a game like this, which is a great bar that is set. The original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 ran absolutely beautifully on this machine. Is the game from 2009? Yes. Can it run on any potato? Yes. But hear me out. Man, this game looks great and runs even better. On all ultra settings, I was well over 60 FPS the entire time. Most of the time, I was in the high 80s in terms of frames per second. I'm also super surprised how many people are still playing this game on PC. When I was searching for a match, the game was reporting over 1,500 players in the matchmaking. Very nice to see in 2026. Bethesda's latest serious Fallout installment ran decently well. Fallout's automatic hardware detector put all my settings to ultra, which made me very suspicious. We were hovering around the 30 FPS mark, but the GPU and RAM were completely maxed out. I'm very impressed with the little i3-6100 in this game. It was nowhere close to a bottleneck, even though Fallout's 4 minimum system requirements are recommending a quad-core processor. Overall, Fallout 4 is just a beautiful looking game as well. It really shows how much work they put into optimization of graphics to run on subpar hardware. Sonic CD is literally some game that I got out of a cereal box. Big surprise, it runs well. I don't understand why it has so much hardware usage though. The game really isn't doing much of anything, but it has almost the same hardware usage, if not more, than Dark Souls 2 did. What on earth were the good guys at Blitz Software doing when they developed this thing? If you're into that IMAX cinematic experience of 24 frames per second, then this game is for you. Otherwise, Cyberpunk 2077 brought this thing to its knees. Even with all of the settings turned down to low and the resolution 1080p, I wasn't able to get 30 FPS. We were in the mid to high 20s the whole time during the stress test. I would say this is not a playable experience. It's interesting that the minimum system requirements are only slightly ahead of Elden Ring, but the performance is considerably lower. The GPU and RAM are simply not able to hold up with this game. It is promising to see the i3-6100 once again nowhere close to the bottleneck. Makes me think that there would be some games out there that would be viable for this old girl. At all low settings, 1080p, Red Dead 2 is also giving that IMAX cinematic experience of a couple dozen frames per second. The RAM and Nvidia Quattro are the problematic components with this game. I have hope that the i3-6100 will be able to run this game, seeing as there's a little bit of room for it, but as it stands, I would not say that this is a playable experience either. It's a shame because I know that the 4GB of VRAM that the Nvidia Quattro P1000 brings to the table was making Red Dead 2 lick its chops. That is a decent amount of VRAM to play with, but ultimately there just wasn't enough performance from this machine. I'm pretty torn on PC pre-builts anymore. A pre-built PC used to be a cheap way to get a partially complete computer with free Windows COA or a Windows key. They used to have standard ATX power supplies as well as standard 24 connectors to the motherboard. Anymore, so many of the big companies such as Dell, HP, and Lenovo all use weird proprietary power supplies in motherboard sizes. It makes it so you really can't customize that much. The Precision 3420 is from the 2016 timeframe. Dell was still designing standard PC power supplies and motherboards at this time, so I've hope for computers from this generation. Going into this, I knew it was going to be an uphill battle. Since I had a small form factor computer, as well as a strange power supply that comes with it. Not only is the power supply only 180 watts, the PCI lane is a single lane, which really limits the amount of GPUs that would fit in the case without modification. I also needed a low profile GPU, which isn't ideal. I'm just happy that Nvidia Quattro P1000 was able to perform decently well with the other specs. Another advantage to getting a pre-built PC is they mostly come with RAM included unless the seller siphoned it out. If I were to build a used gaming PC today, I think I would still try to find a decent pre-build to start with. I think as long as it has either a standard ATX power supply or a big enough power supply to handle the newer graphics cards, it's a good starting point. The price of DDR5 RAM is just simply insane, man. Even just to get 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is going to be the minimum for a lot of these games, you're going to be looking at nearly $200. This is $200 that you should realistically be using to pump into your graphics card instead. For example, you're able to get graphics cards such as the RTX 3070 for a little bit over $200, which is going to be a great graphics card for most rigs. I also acknowledge that I'm using the term building a computer pretty loosely in this video, considering all I had to do was upgrade the graphics card with a compatible one. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be adding these longer form videos in addition to my typical Dark Souls content to see what you guys will enjoy. This one in particular was quite an experiment, so we'll see how it goes. I'm actually very interested in making more budget PC builds. I think they're a super fun way to see how good of a computer you can build on a budget. Thank you guys for all the support, and I'll see you all around.